Miller, your friendly physicist who also holds a bachelor degree from the University of Pittsburgh in film studies. I've studied the media, mass media. I think I'm very qualified to comment on the media. I've studied mass media and social control, and it's been a priority in my life studying the media and commenting on the media, even though a lot of people don't seem to understand what I'm talking about. So that's why I wanted to do this little section, and it's about the media. So I guess I'll start by saying several years ago I placed some video on the internet, and in that video and also in the anonymous novel I suggest starting a media corporation or media company, and that may also diversify in other things, but there's a air of caution to that because I'm also criticizing conglomerate corporations, possibly because they don't have in-house media to prove that they are being legitimate in every area where they function. So where I wanted to start was a media company, and I had no assets, I have no investors, and I have no money, and so I placed internet videos on YouTube, because as I've explained, when I went to high school and the internet was beginning to be touted as this great voice for freedom of speech, that's what I grew up with in high school. PCs that were connected to the internet, and people were able to use freedom of speech, and so that's where I wanted to start this media company. I guess my fear is whether we've lost our window of opportunity, because when I guess I'll pause and I'll go through a little bit of a history of at least video media in the United States, and my parents, my grandparents, they don't really think about it or speak about it, but what they grew up with was a television set, a cathode ray television set. Sorry about that. In their homes, and there were, in the United States, 3 major broadcast networks that broadcast most of the programs into their homes. So, what you have there, you had the way those broadcast networks decided on the programming that they wanted to do. Yes, they tried to appeal to audiences and show them what they liked in order to sell them goods via commercials, which brought their profits into their broadcast network. But they also felt a responsibility to bring the news and things that people maybe necessarily didn't want to see into their broadcast networks. So there was somewhat of a balance, not an equilibrium, but definitely some type of balancing factor there. Again, they tried to figure out what audiences liked by doing random audience samples, and test audiences and things of that nature to see what appealed to audiences. So that's what was brought in until the 80s, 90s into the home, and I've spoke a little bit, this idea of nations coming together because they can witness the accomplishments of the science community, such as the space landing, at the same moment, via live television, and that kind of brought people together, made them feel as a whole people, especially in a nation as diverse as the United States. This united people, and it catered the way for television in people's homes, whereas it was radio before. So that's kind of the breakdown of that. Into the 90s and especially the 2000s, those test audiences began to fade away because actually the cable boxes themselves could gather all the information. Once we switched to digital, now there's exact figures that can be shown, exactly what people are watching, exactly what people like. There's no need. There's no guesswork. So up until the 80s or 90s, investors in the media were taking chances by investing in new sitcoms or new television programs, not really knowing whether, at least the studios were, not really knowing whether they'd be a hit or not. Now there's instant feedback as to that. So enter the internet, and in early 2000s into 2010, up to 2012. Was there a window there where people like me, and there are many podcasters and people that show video, could have united and created a media company based solely off of a basically very cheap broadcasting network that is based on the people? Yes, I believe that's true. The problem now is that we are gearing, or the governments of modern civilization are gearing their anti-terror programs towards isolating people that want to express freedom of speech, and their focus is on other, not necessarily modern nations, but are they applying that in the domestic sector? I don't know. So, it's fine to operate under the assumption that I'm not isolated here in Alberg, and so we're going to go with that, and that's fine. People just don't want to watch the videos. But I want to get into the psychology of that because I also hold a minor in psychology. What's the problem, the issue with that is, as I said, I put out this media on my social media when, in early 2011 or 2014, I think, to try to promote this book and to try to build a media company. Now, I don't want to criticize my friends, but to the people, where that reached, initially one video reached a lot of people, and then subsequent videos just were kind of ignored. And so I want to try to get into that psychology because I want to tie it back into another theory in the anonymous novel that I published, and that is about the German people and the rise of the Nazis. And one argument that I make that I don't hear very often is that the rise of the Nazi Party corresponded almost exactly with the invention of synchronous sound in the motion picture industry. So that happened in the early 30s, and you can see the rise of the Nazi Party through the late 30s. So that was one government that was able to harness the power of the motion picture, and with sync sound now you can show people's speeches on every corner of your nation instead of having to actually be present for those speeches. So to tie that back around to what I was speaking about, and something I was not aware of until I traveled to Berlin for the first time, and I went to the Stasi Museum and learned that something I wasn't aware of was that as the Nazis and as Hitler gained power, he at first invoked a policy of public shaming before isolating people, and leading up to the very horrendous acts during that war. But there was a public shaming policy where people were singled out and brought out into public, and signs were put on them, and in the crowds, the rest of the town were encouraged to publicly shame them, say things to them. So how I want to tie that back around is to this mindset of people. Again, I've spoken to the previous generations, and whether they acknowledge it or not, things were brought into their house via the national broadcast networks that they didn't necessarily agree with. Did those have effects on other generations? Yes, but they accepted it because they wanted the entertainment as well and the feel-good moments that television provided. So if you're trying to start an independent media company and you're trying to use social media to do that, the arguments that I've heard is that people aren't going to share things unless they agree with you, or things of that nature. So to some of the comments I've made about American Idol and these other places where you vote, or where I want to send a message to my favorite celebrity. I want to do this, I want to do that. So you text on your private smartphone that you carry around everywhere with you, or you vote with that, and you get all this spam and all this other garbage signed up automatically because you did that. Here I have a website and YouTube videos with no malware on them whatsoever. You literally just have to click and share them. So, that's one aspect I want to, kind of have people think about is, you're hesitant to click and share. And so what I'm bringing that into is we had a generation that might have shared things even though they didn't care or didn't agree with it. But now you get into this social media situation, and the very enabling system that allows people to speak their mind and share their thoughts and ideas and theories also hinders them, because you have this social media, and if you share it, one, there's some kind of implied notion that you agree with it, which even though you could type something at the top that I agree with nothing that is said here, I just feel it's my duty as a citizen living in freedom of speech to share this. Secondly, you have this hesitancy because there are comment boards, and there are situations where people can just comment, and is that kind of like a spam that pops up on there? I guess. I think there's ways to block that. There should be. So, you have I'm bringing it around to, you have almost a public shaming situation, and you have preceding generations now that may be fearful to share certain videos and things like that, because they don't realize that it actually helps build the credibility of someone that could start a media company and show you places of the world that need to be shown, or aspects or things, and it isn't afraid to say the things that people don't want to hear. So, to that notion, I'm going to pause just briefly. It's getting long, and I just want to make sure I've covered everything. So to that notion, I feel that my story, it could be split into multiple stories, and so to those old broadcast networks, or those anyone trying to have a media share in anything, do you call this man just based on one faction of his story and try to get a hold of him and wine him and dine him and sign him into a contract, at which point I can look at contracts and enable myself to gear myself towards also having an independent media company? Do you do that? Because I do have ideas to pitch for films and movies, and whether you want to hear those or not, I don't know, but you could try, or at least hear me out. So again, that's more of a quick way to do that, but this is again more towards number one. We can operate on the assumption that I'm not being isolated, even though I have multiple YouTube documentations of certain web browsers not showing my YouTube account, not showing certain videos. That could just be whatever. So it could be because I'm in Denmark or something. So we'll operate under the assumption that I'm not being isolated. And so I don't feel I gave an adequate explanation to my friends and loved ones, because again, it comes down to just meeting people one-on-one and trying to explain these concepts over and over again. So, to the people out there that might see that, if you sit and you see these things, or you hear these interesting perspectives, and you sit and do not act, and you literally, is all you had to do is click a mouse button to share a piece of media, is, they say inaction is dangerous, and if that's the minimal action that you had to do, and you didn't, I guess, there's stories through history of people that didn't take any type of action and then had to hide and do things. So I'll end with this thought, and it's more towards the people my age and maybe a little older. Say you post, insightful type of material on your personal accounts, or you create a public account and you do it. you can cancel and you can get out of it and you can restart it and find all your friends again. It's not that big of an issue. That is getting into more of an action. So the thought that I wanted to end with was, if you do put that stuff up and a bunch of people post nasty things or interesting things or whatever things, do you then wait 3 months till the next wine and cheese party, and when you see them, do you, try to speak to them about it? Do you, is there a social aspect to these social media comments? And if we're not preserving that, then it goes back to exactly what I'm talking about. So do these people try to say, hey, I didn't really like what you said on my board there, or hey man, hey, it's all in good fun, it's just the internet, who cares? If those conversations aren't happening and you just kind of awkwardly just ignore or whatever, that's fine too. But then if that's the case, then why would you stay inactive? And so I guess that's the thought that I leave with is, if you live in a nation where you're founded on freedom of speech, which most democratic societies' constitutions are based off of, then what does the internet and what does social media or media sharing mean to you?